5. Stepan Arkadyevich had learned easily at school, thanks to his excellent abilities, but he had been idle and mischievous, and therefore was one of the lowest in his class. But in spite of his habitually dissipated mode of life, his inferior grade in the service, and his comparative youth, he occupied the honorable and lucrative position of president of one of the government boards at Moscow. This post he had received through his sister Anna's husband, Alexey Alexandrovich Karenin, who held one of the most important positions in the ministry, to whose department the Moscow office belonged. But if Karenin had not got his brother-in-law his birth, then through 100 other personages, brothers, sisters, cousins, uncles, and aunts, Steva Oblonsky would have received this post or some other similar one, together with a salary of 6,000 absolutely needful for him, as his affairs, in spite of his wife's considerable property, were in an embarrassed condition. Half Moscow and Petersburg were friends and relations of Stepan Arkadyevich. Half Moscow and Petersburg were friends and relations of Stepan Arkadyevich. He was born in the midst of those who had been and are the powerful ones of this world. 1/3 of the men in the government, the older men, had been friends of his father's and had known him in petticoats. Another third were his intimate chums, and the remainder were friendly acquaintances. Consequently, the distributors of earthly blessing in the shape of places, friends, shares, and such were all his friends, and could not overlook one of their own set. And Oblonsky had no need to make any special exertion to get a lucrative post. He had only not to refuse things, not to show jealousy, not to be quarrelsome or take offense, all of which, from his characteristic good nature, he never did. I would have struck him as absurd if he had been told that he would not get a position with the salary he required, especially as he expected nothing out of the way. He only wanted what the men of his own age and standing did get, and he was no worse qualified for performing duties of the kind than any other man. Stepan Arkadyevich was not merely liked by all who knew him for his good. Stepan Arkadyevich was not merely liked by all who knew him for his good humor, but for his bright disposition and his unquestionable honesty. In him, in his handsome, radiant figure, his sparkling eyes, black hair and eyebrows, and the white and red of his face, there was something which produced a physical effect of the kindliness and good humor on the people who met him. "Aha, Steva Oblonsky, here he is," was almost always said with a smile of delight on meeting him. Even though it happened at times that after conversation with him it seemed that nothing particularly delightful had happened, the next day and the next everyone was just as delighted at meeting him again. After filling for 3 years the post of president of one of the government boards at Moscow, Stepan Arkadyevich had won the respect as well as the liking of his fellow officials, subordinates, and superiors, all who had business with him. The principal qualities in Stepan Arkadyevich which had gained him his universal respect in the service consisted, in the first place, of his extreme indulgence for others, founded on a consciousness of his own shortcomings. Secondly, of his perfect liberalism, not the liberalism he read in the papers, but the liberalism that was in his blood, in virtue of which he treated all men perfectly equally and exactly the same, whatever their fortune or calling might be. And thirdly, the most important point, his complete indifference to the business in which he was engaged, in consequence of which he was never carried away and never made mistakes. On reaching the offices of the board, Stepan Arkadьевич, escorted by a deferential porter with a portfolio, went into his little private room, put on his uniform, and went into the boardroom. The clerks and copyists all rose, greeting him with good-humored deference. Stepan Arkadьевич moved quickly as ever his place, shook hands with his colleagues, and sat down. He made a joke or two, and talked just as much as was consistent with due decorum, and began work. No one knew better than Stepan Arkadьевич how to hit on the exact line between freedom, simplicity, and official stiffness necessary for the agreeable conduct of business. A secretary with a good-humored deference common to everyone in Stepan Arkadьevich's office came up with papers and began to speak in the familiar and easy tone which had been introduced by Stepan Arkadьevich. He had succeeded in getting the information from the government department of Penza. Here, would you care? You've got them at last, said Stepan Arkadьevich, laying his finger on the paper. Now, gentlemen, and the sitting of the board began. If they knew, he thought, bending his head with a significant air as he listened to the report, what a guilty little boy the president was half an hour ago, and his eyes were laughing during the reading of the report. Till 2 o'clock the sitting would go on without a break, and at 2 o'clock there would be an interval in luncheon. It was not yet 2 when the large glass doors of the boardroom suddenly opened, and someone came in. All the officials sitting on the further side under the portrait of the Tsar and the eagle, delighted at any distraction, looked round at the door. But the doorkeeper standing at the door at once drove out the intruder and closed the glass door after him. When the case had been read through, Stepan Arkadьevich got up and stretched, and by way of tribute to the liberalism of the times took out a cigarette in the boardroom and went into his private room. 2 of the members of the board, the old veteran in the service, Nikitin, and the Kamerjanker, Grinevich, went in with him. We shall have time to finish after lunch, said Stepan Arkadьevich. To be sure we shall, said Nikitin. A pretty sharp fellow his foreman must be, said Grinevich, one of the persons taking part in the case where they were examining. Stepan Arkadьevich frowned at Grinevich's word, giving him thereby to understand that it was improper to pass judgment prematurely, and made him no reply. Who was that came in? He asked the doorkeeper. Someone, Your Excellency, crept in without permission directly my back was turned. He was asking for you. I told him. When the members come out, then... Where is he? Maybe he's gone into the passage, but here he comes anyway. That is he, said the doorkeeper, pointing to a strongly built, broad-shouldered man with a curly beard, who, without taking off his sheepskin cap, was running lightly and rapidly up the worn steps of the stone staircase. One of the members going down, a lean official with a portfolio, stood out of his way and looked disapprovingly at the length of the stranger, then glanced inquiringly at Oblonsky. Stepan Arkadьevich was standing at the top of the stairs. His good, naturally beaming face above the embroidered collar of his uniform beamed more than ever when he recognized the man coming up. "Why, it's actually you, Levin, at last," he said with a friendly, mocking smile, scanning Levin as he approached. "How is it you have deigned to Look me up in this then, said Stepan Arkadyevich, and not content with shaking hands, he kissed his friend. Have you been here long? I have just come, and very much wanted to see you, said Levin, looking shyly at and at the same time angrily and uneasily around. Well, let's go into my room, said Stepan Arkadyevich. He knew his friend's sensitive and irritable shyness, and taking his arm, he drew him along as though guiding him through dangers. Stepan Arkadyevich was on familiar terms with almost all his acquaintances and called almost all of them by their Christian names. Old men of 60, boys of 20, actors, ministers, merchants, and in general, so that many of his intimate chums were to be found at the extreme ends of the social ladder, and would have been very much surprised to learn that they had, through the medium of Oblonsky, something in common. He was the familiar friend of everyone with whom he took a glass of champagne, and he took a glass of champagne with everyone, and when, in consequence, he met any of his disreputable chums, as he used in joke to call many of his friends in the presence of his subordinates, he well knew how, with his characteristic tact, to diminish the disagreeable impression made on them. Levin was not a disreputable chum, but Oblonsky, with his ready tact, felt that Levin fancied he might not care to show his intimacy with him before his subordinates, and so he made haste to take him off into his room. Levin was almost of the same age as Oblonsky. The intimacy did not rest merely on champagne. Levin had been the friend and companion of his early youth. They were fond of one another in spite of the difference of their characters and tastes, as friends are fond of one another who have been together in early youth. But in spite of this, each of them, as is often the way with men who have selected careers of different kinds, though in discussion he would even justify the other's career, in his heart despised it. It seemed to each of them that the life he led himself was the only real life, and the life led by his friend was a mere phantasm. Oblonsky could not restrain a slight mocking smile at the sight of Levin. How often he had seen him come up to Moscow from the country where he was doing something, but what precisely Stepan Arkadyevich could never quite make out, and indeed took no interest in the matter. Levin arrived in Moscow always excited, in a hurry, rather ill at ease or irritated by his own want of ease, or for the most part with a perfectly new, unexpected view of things. Stepan Arkadyevich laughed at this and liked it. In the same way Levin, in his heart, despised the town mode of life of his friends and his official duties, which he laughed at and regarded as trifling. But the difference was that Oblonsky, as he was doing the same as everyone did, laughed complacently and good-humoredly, while Levin laughed without complacency and sometimes angrily. "We have long been expecting you," said Stepan Arkadyevich, going into his room and letting Levin's hand go as though to show that here all danger was over. "I'm very, very glad to see you," he went on. "Well, how are you? When did you come?" Levin was silent, looking at the unknown faces of Oblonsky's two companions, and especially at the hand of the elegant Grinovich, which had such long white fingers, such long yellow filbert-shaped nails, and such huge shining studs on the shirt cuffs that apparently they absorbed all his attention, and allowed him no freedom of thought. Oblonsky noticed this at once and smiled. "Ah, to be sure, let me introduce you," he said. "My colleagues Philip Ivanovich Nikitin, Mikhail Stanislavich Grinevich," and turning to Levin, "a district councillor, a modern district councilman, a gymnast who lifts 13 stone with one hand, a cattle breeder and a sportsman, and my friend Konstantin Dmitrovich Levin, the brother of Sergei Ivanovich Kuznishev." "Delighted," said the veteran. "I have the honor of knowing your brother, Sergei Ivanovich," said Grinevich, holding out his slender hand with its long nails. Levin frowned, shook hands coldly, and at once turned to Oblonsky. Though he had a great respect for his half-brother, an author well known to all Russia, he could not endure it when people treated him not as Konstantin Levin, but as the brother of the celebrated Kuznishev. "No, I'm no longer a district councillor. I have quarreled with them all and don't go to the meeting any more," he said, turning to Oblonsky. "You've been quick about it," said Oblonsky with a smile. "But how? Why?" "It's a long story. I'll tell you sometime," said Levin. But he began telling him at once. "Well, to put it shortly, I was convinced that nothing was really done by the district councils or ever could be," he began, as though someone had just insulted him. "On one side, it's a plaything. They play at being a parliament, and I'm neither young enough nor old enough to find amusement in playthings. And on the other side," he trembled, "it means for the coterie of the district to make money. Formerly they had wardships, courts of justice. Now they have the district council, not in the form of bribes, but in the form of unearned salary," he said as hotly as though someone of those present had opposed his opinion. "Aha, you are in a new phase. Aha, you are in a new phase again. I see a conservative," said Stepan Arkadyevich. However, we can go into that later." "Yes, later. But I wanted to see you," said Levin, looking with hatred at Grinevich's hand. Stepan Arkadyevich gave a scarcely perceptible smile. "How was it to you? How was it? You used to say you would never wear European dress again," he said, scanning his new suit, obviously cut by a French tailor. "Ah, I see, a new face." Levin suddenly blushed, not as grown men blush, slightly without being themselves aware of it, but as boys blush, feeling that they are ridiculous through the shyness, and consequently ashamed of it, and blushing still more, almost to the point of tears. And it was so strange to see this sensible, manly face in such a childish plight, that Oblonsky at uh, left of looking at him. "Oh, where shall we meet? You know I want very much to talk to you," said Levin. Oblonsky seemed to ponder. "I'll tell you what, let's go to Kurin's to lunch, and there we can talk. I'm free till 3. "No," answered Levin, after an instant's thought. "I have got to go on somewhere else." "All right then, let's dine together." "Dine together? But I have nothing very particular, only a few words to say and a question I want to ask you, and we can have a talk afterwards." "Well, say the few words, then, at once, and we'll gossip after dinner." "Well, it's this," said Levin, "but it is of no importance, though." His face all at once took an expression of anger from the effort he was making to surmount his shyness. What are the Sherbatskys doing? Everything as it used to be, he said. Stepan Arkadyevich, who had long known that Levin was in love with his sister-in-law Kitty, gave a hardly perceptible smile, and his eyes sparkled merrily. You said a few words, but I can't answer in a few words because, excuse me a minute, the secretary came in with respectful, familiar, and the modest consciousness characteristic of every secretary of superiority to his chief in the knowledge of their business. He went up to Oblonsky with some papers and began on the pretense of asking a question to explain some objection. Stepan Arkadyevich, without hearing him out, laid his hand genuinely on the secretary's sleeve. "No, you do as I told you," he said, softening his words with a smile, and with a brief explanation of his view of the matter, he turned away from the papers and said, "So, do it the way, if you please, Zahar Nikitich." The secretary retired in confusion. During the consultation with the secretary, Levin had completely recovered from his embarrassment. He was standing with his elbow on the back of a chair, and on his face was a look of ironical attention. I don't understand it, he said. "What don't you understand?" said Oblonsky, smiling as brightly as ever and picking up a cigarette. He expected some queer outburst from Levin. "I don't understand what you're doing," said Levin, shrugging his shoulders. "How can you do it seriously? Why not? Why, because there is nothing in it." "You think so, but we are overwhelmed with work on paper. But there is a gift for it," added Levin. "That's to say, you think there is a lack of something in me?" "Perhaps so," said Levin, "but all of the same I admire your grandeur, and I'm proud that I've a friend in such a great person. You've not answered my question, though," he went on, with a desperate effort, looking Oblonsky straight in the face. "Oh, that's all very well. You wait a bit, and you'll come to this yourself. It's very nice for you to have over 6,000 acres in the Karazinsky district, and such muscles, and the freshness of a girl of 12. Still, you'll be one of us one day. Yes, as to your question, there is no change, but it's a pity you've been away so long." "Oh, why so?" Levin queried, panic-stricken. "Oh, nothing," responded Oblonsky. "We'll talk it over, but what's brought up what's brought you up to town?" "Oh, we'll talk about that too later on," said Levin, running again up to his ears. "All right, I see," said Stepan Arkadyevich. "I should ask you to come to us, you know, but my wife's not quite the thing. But I tell you what, if you want to see him, they're sure now to be at the zoological gardens from 4 to 5. Kitty's kids. You drive along there, and I'll come and fetch you, and we'll go and dine somewhere together." "Capital. So goodbye till then." Now mind, you'll forget. I know you, or rush off home to the country." Stepan Arkadyevich called out, laughing. "No, truly." And Levin went out of the room only when he was in the doorway, remembering that he had forgotten to take leave of Oblonsky's colleagues. "The gentleman must be a man of great energy," said Greenwich when Levin had gone away. "Yes, my dear boy," said Stepan Arkadyevich, nodding his head. "He's a lucky fellow. Over 6,000 acres in the Karazinsky district, everything before him, and what youth and vigor, not like some of us. You have a great deal to complain of, haven't you, Stepan Arkadyevich?" "Ah, yes, I'm in a poor way, a bad way," Stepan Arkadyevich, with a heavy sigh. Chapter 6. When Oblonsky asked Levin what had brought him to town, Levin blushed and was furious with himself for blushing because he could not answer. I have come to make you sister-in-law an offer, though that was precisely what he had come for. The families of the Levins and the Sherbatsky were old, noble Moscow families, and had always been on intimate and friendly terms. This intimacy had grown still closer during Levin's student days. He had both prepared for the university with the youth Prince Sherbatsky, the brother of Kitty and Dolly, and had entered at the same time with him. In those days, Levin used often to be in the Sherbatsky's house. In those days, Levin used often to be in the Sherbatsky's house, and he was in love with the Sherbatsky's household. Strange as it may appear, it was with the household, the family, that Konstantin Levin was in love, especially with the feminine half of the household. Levin did not remember his own mother, and his only sister was older than he was, so that it was in the Sherbatsky house that he saw for the first time that inner life of an old, noble, cultivated, and honorable family of which he had been deprived by the death of his father and mother. All the members of the family, especially the feminine half, were pictured by him, as it were, wrapped about with a mysterious poetical veil, and he not only perceived no defects whatever in them, but under the poetical veil they shrouded them he assumed the existence of the loftiest sentiments and every possible perfection. Why it was these three young ladies had one day to speak French, and the next English. Why it was that at certain hours they played by turns on the piano, and sounds of which were audible in the brothers' room above, where the students used to work. Why they were visited by those professors of French literature, of music, of drawing, of dancing. Why at certain hours all the three young ladies with the Mademoiselle Linon drove in the coach to the Tversky Boulevard, uh, dressed in their satin cloaks, Dolly in a long one, Natalia in a half-long one, and Kitty in one so short that her shapely legs in tidy rose-red stockings were visible to all beholders. Why it was they had to walk about the Tversky Boulevard, escorted by a footman with a gold cockade in his hat. All this and much more that was done in the mysterious world he did not understand, but he was sure that everything that was done there was very good, and he was in love precisely with the mystery of the proceedings. In his student days he had all but been in love with the eldest, Dolly, but she was soon married to Oblonsky. Then he began being in love with the second. He felt as it were that he had to be in love with one of these sisters, only he could not quite make out only he couldn't quite make out which. But Natalia too had hardly made her appearance in the world when she married the diplomat Lvov. Kitty was still a child when Levin left the university. Young Sherbatsky went into the navy, was drowned in the Baltic, and Levin's relations with the Sherbatskys, in spite of his friendship with Oblonsky, became less intimate. But when early in the winter of this year Levin came to Moscow after a year in the country and saw the Sherbatsky, he realized which of the three sisters he was indeed destined to love. One would have thought that nothing could be simpler than for him, a man of good family, rather rich than poor, and 32 years old, to make the young Princess Sherbatsky an offer of marriage. In all likelihood he would at once have been looked upon as a good match. But Levin was in love, and so it seemed to him that Kitty was so perfect in every respect that she was a creature for above everything earthly, and that he was a creature so low and so earthly that it could not even be conceived that other people and she herself could regard him as worthy of her. After spending 2 months in Moscow in a state of enchantment, seeing Kitty almost every day in society into which he went so as to meet her, he abruptly decided that it could not be and went back to the country. Levin's conviction that it could not be was founded on the idea that in the eyes of her family he was a disadvantageous and worthless match for the charming Kitty, and that Kitty herself could not love him. In her family's eyes, he had no ordinary, definite career and position in society, while his contemporaries by this time, when he was 32, were already one a colonel and another professor, another director of a bank and railways, or president of a board like Oblonsky. But he knew very well now he must appear to others, was a country gentleman, occupied in breeding cattle, shooting game, and building barns, in other words, and a fellow of no ability who had not been turned out well, and who was doing just what, according to the ideas of the world, is done by people fit for nothing else. The mysterious, enchanting Kitty herself could not love such an ugly person as he conceived himself to be, and above all, such an ordinary, in no way striking person. Moreover, his attitude to Kitty in the past, the attitude of a grown-up person to a child, arising from his friendship with her brother, seemed to him yet another obstacle to love. An ugly, good-natured man, as he considered himself, might he suppose be like the friend, but to be loved with such a love as that with which he loved Kitty, one would, one would need to be handsome and still more a distinguished man. He had heard that the women often did care for ugly and ordinary men, but he did not believe it, for he judged by himself, and he could not himself have loved any but beautiful, mysterious, and exceptional women. But after spending 2 months alone in the country, he was conceived that this was not one of those passions of which he had experience in his early youth, that this feeling gave him not an instant rest, that he could not live without deciding the question, would she or would she not be his wife, and that his despair had arisen only from his own imaginings, that he had no sort of proof that he would be rejected. And he had now come to Moscow with a firm determination to make an offer and get married if he were accepted, or he could not conceive what would become of him if he were rejected.